You possess qualities and capacities that you refuse to claim, talents that you minimize or deny, potential that terrifies you more than your failures ever could. This is not the familiar shadow that Jung described, the darkness you reject and project onto others, the cruelty and weakness and selfishness you cannot acknowledge in yourself. This is what Jung called the golden shadow, the brightness you have disowned, the strengths and gifts and possibilities that you keep hidden because claiming them feels more dangerous than remaining small. The golden shadow contains everything you could be but are afraid to become, every talent you possess but refuse to develop, every aspect of greatness that you observe in others while denying it exists in yourself. You see someone confident and charismatic and feel both admiration and envy, never recognizing that what you see in them is projection of your own unclaimed capacity for presence and impact. You watch someone create or lead or speak truth and experience it as foreign territory, as something others can do but you cannot, never acknowledging that your certainty of your own limitations is defense against the terror of discovering you were wrong about what you are capable of. Understanding why you fear your own potential requires examining what claiming it would mean, what it would demand, what it would cost, and why remaining small feels safer than becoming large. The golden shadow is built through the same mechanism as the dark shadow, through rejecting aspects of yourself that consciousness deems unacceptable or threatening, through splitting yourself into acceptable and unacceptable, where what gets rejected accumulates in the unconscious and operates without your awareness. But where the dark shadow contains qualities you judge as bad or wrong or shameful, the golden shadow contains qualities you experience as too much, too powerful, too visible, too demanding of responsibility you do not want to accept. You learned early that certain strengths were dangerous, that expressing them led to punishment or rejection or to expectations you could not meet. The child who was naturally confident learned that confidence was arrogance that adults needed to correct. The child who was creatively gifted learned that standing out created envy or led to pressure to perform that became unbearable. The child who had natural leadership capacity learned that taking charge made them threatening to authority, or made them responsible for outcomes they could not control. These lessons taught you to hide your strengths, to minimize your capacities, to present yourself as smaller and less capable than you actually are. The hiding becomes so automatic that you forget you are doing it, genuinely come to believe that you lack the qualities you have spent your life suppressing, experience your own potential as something that exists in others but not in yourself. This creates the golden shadow, the repository of all the strengths and talents and possibilities that you rejected because claiming them felt too dangerous, because being seen as capable meant being held to standards you feared you could not maintain, because excellence attracts attention that feels threatening when you have learned that visibility leads to criticism or attack or isolation from those who are invested in keeping you small. The golden shadow therefore contains not your actual limitations but your disowned capacities, not what you cannot do but what you are afraid to do, not absence of potential but presence of potential that has been rejected and denied and kept hidden because claiming it would require becoming someone different than who you have believed yourself to be. You fear your potential because claiming it would destroy the identity you have built around your limitations, would require abandoning the familiar self-concept that has organized your life even when that self-concept is restrictive and painful. You have spent years or decades being the person who cannot, who is not good enough, who lacks what others possess, and this identity provides strange comfort even while it causes suffering. The comfort comes from knowing who you are, from the predictability of familiar limitations, from not having to face the uncertainty and risk that would come with discovering you are capable of more than you believed. The small self feels safe because it has clear boundaries, because you know what to expect from it, because it protects you from the vulnerability of attempting what you might fail at, from the exposure that comes with trying to be excellent rather than remaining safely mediocre. As long as you believe you cannot, you never have to face whether you actually could. You never have to risk the discovery that your failure might be not lack of capacity, but lack of courage to use the capacity you possess. Claiming your potential would mean admitting that your limitations were chosen rather than given, that you have been hiding rather than lacking, that years of underachievement were self-protection rather than accurate reflection of your abilities. This recognition is devastating because it means you cannot blame circumstances or lack of talent or bad luck for where you are. Must face that you have been complicit in your own smallness, have been actively preventing yourself from becoming what you are capable of becoming. The fear is also of responsibility that comes with claiming power. If you acknowledge your capacity for leadership, you become responsible for leading. If you admit your creative gifts, you become responsible for creating. If you recognize your ability to influence others, you become responsible for how you use that influence. The golden shadow contains not only your strengths, but the obligations those strengths create, the expectations they generate, the accountability they demand. You fear your potential, because becoming who you could be would mean losing relationships with those who are invested in keeping you small, would create distance from family or friends or partners who need you to remain limited because your limitations make them feel safe or superior or needed. Your growth threatens their equilibrium, challenges the roles they have assigned you, forces them to confront their own unused potential when they see you claiming yours. This social cost is real, not imaginary. People do withdraw when you change, do become hostile when you grow beyond the position they assigned you, do attempt to pull you back into familiar patterns through guilt or criticism or withdrawal of approval. The person who was the family failure cannot become successful without disrupting family dynamics that were organized around their failure. The friend who was always the listener cannot become the one who speaks without changing friendships that depended on their silence. Claiming your golden shadow means accepting that some relationships were based on your remaining small, that some connections will be lost when you grow, that people who claim to love you were actually invested in your limitations because your limitations served their needs. This loss is painful, even when the relationships were restricting you, even when maintaining them required self-betrayal, even when letting them go is necessary for becoming who you actually are. The fear is also of envy you will trigger in others, of the hostility that excellence attracts from those who experience your success as reproach to their own mediocrity, of the isolation that comes from standing out when you have learned that belonging requires blending in. You have seen what happens to those who are visibly talented or successful or powerful, have watched them become targets for criticism and resentment and attempts to diminish them, and you have concluded that safety lies in remaining average, in never triggering the envy that your full expression would create. You fear your potential because claiming it would mean facing that you have been living far below your capacities, that you have wasted years on pursuits that did not engage your actual talents, that you have accepted situations and relationships and work that were beneath what you are capable of. This recognition brings grief for the lost time, anger at yourself for the self-betrayal, shame about the ways you have hidden and minimized, and refused to use what you were given. The waste is particularly painful because it cannot be recovered, cannot be undone through future achievement, represents permanent loss of time and opportunity and development that will never return. You cannot get back the years you spent pretending to be less than you are, cannot undo the choices you made from fear rather than from courage, cannot reclaim the person you would have become if you had claimed your golden shadow earlier. This grief and regret are so painful that it feels easier to continue the pattern than to face what has been lost, easier to remain small than to acknowledge how small you have kept yourself, easier to maintain the belief that you lack capacity than to admit you possessed it all along but were too afraid to use it. The continuation of the pattern at least avoids the recognition of waste, allows you to believe you are still discovering your limitations rather than facing that you have been hiding from your capacities. The fear is also of discovering that even when you claim your full potential, it might not be enough, that you might be excellent and still fail, that Using all your capacities might reveal that they are insufficient for the dreams you have been protecting through never fully attempting them. As long as you do not try fully, you can maintain the fantasy that you could succeed if you really tried. You can preserve the possibility that your potential is greater than it actually is. Claiming the golden shadow risks discovering its limits, risks finding out that your best might not be as impressive as you imagined when you kept it hidden. You fear your potential because you unconsciously sabotage yourself whenever you approach the threshold of claiming it, create crises or distractions or self-destructive behaviors whenever you get close to breakthrough. Ensure through unconscious mechanisms that you never actually have to face whether you could succeed if you genuinely tried. The sabotage appears as external circumstances but is actually internal resistance. Is the part of you that is terrified of change, using whatever methods are available to prevent the growth that consciousness claims to want. This sabotage is visible in the pattern where you work toward goal and then destroy your progress just before achieving it, where you build something and then tear it down, where you create opportunities and then ensure you cannot take advantage of them. The timing reveals that this is not bad luck or external interference, but is unconscious protection against having to claim the success that would require you to become someone different, someone larger, someone who could no longer hide behind the identity of unfulfilled potential. The self-sabotage serves multiple functions. It confirms your belief in your limitations and proves that you were right to not try fully. It protects you from the responsibility that success would bring. It maintains familiar patterns even when those patterns cause suffering. It prevents the grief of recognizing how much time you have wasted. It avoids triggering envy in others. It keeps relationships stable by ensuring you remain small. But the cost is living perpetually beneath your capacities, never knowing what you could accomplish if you stopped sabotaging yourself, remaining forever in the realm of unfulfilled potential, where you can maintain the fantasy of greatness without ever having to test whether the fantasy corresponds to reality. The golden shadow remains golden partly because it remains shadow, stays beautiful because it stays unrealized, maintains its promise because the promise is never fulfilled and therefore never revealed to be less than imagined. The deepest fear of your potential is existential. Claiming your golden shadow means accepting that you are responsible for who you become, that you cannot blame circumstances or other people or lack of opportunity for remaining small, that the life you have is largely a result of choices you have made, including the choice to hide your capacities rather than developing them. This responsibility is terrifying because it eliminates all excuses, removes all external explanations for why you are not living fully, forces you to face that the primary obstacle to becoming who you could be is not the world, but is you. Claiming the golden shadow also means facing mortality differently, means recognizing that you have limited time to use the capacities you possess, that death will come whether or not you ever became who you were capable of becoming, that the waste is not just of past time, but is potentially of all your remaining time if you continue refusing to claim your potential. This urgency is uncomfortable, creates pressure to act, demands that you stop hiding and start becoming. The integration of the golden shadow is therefore not a comfortable process of discovering pleasant truths about yourself, but is demanding recognition that you are more capable and more responsible and more powerful than you have allowed yourself to be, that your smallness is chosen rather than imposed, that claiming your full capacity requires courage and sacrifice, and willingness to lose what was built on remaining limited. The terror is not of discovering you are inadequate, but of discovering you are adequate, not of failing, but of succeeding, not of being unable, but of being able, and therefore being responsible for using your abilities rather than hiding them. Conclusion: you fear your own potential because claiming it would destroy the identity built around limitations, would cause relationships organized around your smallness, would bring grief for wasted years and responsibility for future choices, would eliminate excuses and require facing that you are capable of more than you have allowed yourself to become. The golden shadow contains not your lacks, but your unclaimed capacities. Not what you cannot do, but what you are afraid to do. Not absence of talent, but presence of talent that has been hidden because visibility felt more dangerous than remaining invisible. The fear serves multiple protective functions, maintains familiar self-concept even when restrictive, avoids vulnerability of attempting excellence, protects from envy and hostility that success attracts, preserves fantasy of greater potential by never testing it, prevents recognition of self-betrayal and waste. But the protection costs you your life, costs you becoming who you could be, costs you using the gifts you possess, costs you the satisfaction of living fully rather than perpetually beneath your capacities. Integration requires facing these fears rather than being controlled by them, requires claiming your strengths even when claiming them feels dangerous, requires accepting responsibility that comes with power, requires grieving waste while committing to not wasting more time, requires risking relationships that depend on your remaining small, requires testing your potential rather than protecting it through never using it. The golden shadow must be brought into light, must be owned and developed and expressed, must become conscious capacity rather than unconscious potential. The work is terrifying because it requires becoming who you actually are rather than who you have pretended to be, requires living large rather than small, requires visibility rather than hiding, requires using your gifts rather than denying them. But the alternative is living perpetually in fear of your own potential, never knowing what you could have become, dying with your golden shadow still golden because still shadow, still unrealized, still only potential that was protected from reality through being kept forever hidden.